I wanted to introduce to you our final speaker of the evening, Mr. Bengali Kaba. And Bengali is the VP of Growth at Instacart. I have a list of questions, but this is really about you guys and what you guys want to learn as the audience. And we'll just kick it off, though, with a round of applause from every single one of you for coming out tonight and investing in yourself and your career, and also for Bengali for sharing his knowledge with you tonight. So one more time. Yeah. All right, very good. So thank you. I'll shake your hands and thank you for coming out tonight. Okay, so Bengali, can you tell me a little bit about your career path and how what led you to become the VP of Growth at Instacart?
Sure. First of all, thank you all for coming. I got asked to do this, I think, a couple months ago, and I was expecting like, it'd be like small room, 20 people, totally chill. Of course I'll do this. So very inspiring to see that there's this many people who are even interested in growth design in general. Lex, Chaitana, I don't know where she went, but like, thank you. That was amazing. I've not met you all, but we need to be friends. It's actually really interesting because to their point, growth is like this kind of like mystery wrapped in an enigma. There's not really like a seminal work out there that explains it all. So it's really interesting to hear other practitioners talk about it in a way that like resonates with how you think about it. My story is a little bit interesting and unique. There's a lot of arcs to my career. There's one arc, I was actually in education for many years. It's a whole other story for another day. I worked on Wall Street for a few years, another story for another day. I guess the story really starts for me in 2011 when I actually did my own startup, and it was down in LA when Silicon Beach really wasn't a thing, actually. And it was actually an early competitor to what was then Trunk Club, and it was actually pre-launch of Stitch Fix. So it was focused on subscription clothing for men early in that cycle. Right time, right kind of model, wrong strategy, lost a lot of money. It's like never doing this again. But then, after like a year of rebounding, I spent a year actually at DirecTV's Digital Innovation Lab, helping them to think about the future of media consumption because they knew the set-top box was going away. And then I ended up going to Facebook. And so I moved up to the Bay to go work at Facebook. And so at that time in 2014, I joined Facebook in April 2014. And Facebook had, I think, about 120 product managers. So not a lot for a product that then had about 1.5 billion monthly active users. And I ended up getting hiring in what was called a generalist pool. And so I wasn't hired to a team. I was hired to come in and then find a team. And so it created this opportunity for me to really distinctly think about what I wanted to do with my time at Facebook. And so, I love their story of the history of growth. I think it is 92.5% accurate. The other 7.5% that is missing, not inaccurate, but missing, was that, Sean Ellis, who's a buddy of mine, created the notion of hacking growth, but Facebook was actually the first company to create a consumer product growth team. And they did this because their user base was slowing down ahead of their IPO. And so part and parcel of the growth story today, and as we understand growth product and growth design, actually comes out of Facebook and the legacy that Facebook has created. And so Facebook has basically been, if you know baseball, the notion of a farm team, the team that has developed a lot of the leaders for growth. So Ron McCabe, who leads growth at Lyft, was ex-Facebook. Praveen, who used to lead growth at Tesla, is ex-Facebook. Ed Baker, who used to lead growth for Uber, is ex-Facebook. And so a lot of what I decided when I was there was, I didn't think I was going to stay at Facebook for more than 2 years. And I said to myself, the two things I want to learn while I'm here are growth or monetization, because those are two things that I felt were uniquely able to learn there. And I was like, maybe I'll do my own startup again. And I just want to know how to grow it. Anyway, fast forward, I spent my first 2 years on the Facebook growth team, running a team called Friending. And basically what Friending is, it was my job to think about all of the elements for how we make friends and how we build the social graph on Facebook. So this is all things from the UI, across web, mobile web, the native platforms, the machine learning recommendations, and all of that. And when I joined in 2014, the US was pretty saturated, but what wasn't, and where we had a lot of problems, was in India. And so I actually spent a lot of my time going back and forth to Mumbai, to Delhi, and other places, thinking about the differences and the problems and the pain points around friending in India. I did this for 2 years, huge team. I think it was about 50 people on that team. And then I ended up jumping over to Instagram in January 2016. And so Instagram was actually at an interesting point. It really had stopped growing tremendously. The growth rate was like, I think only about 5 to 7% the year before I joined, so 2015. And growth was a new organization at Instagram that the founders had just started to believe was necessary, but didn't really have any conviction in. And so when I got to Instagram in January 2016, I think there was one designer who I loved to death. We spent a ton of time together, one researcher, one data scientist, one growth marketer, and about 18 engineers and 2 PMs. That was January 2016, and Instagram had 450 million monthly actives then. I left Instagram in November of last year. I was head of growth at Instagram. And when I left, we had 1.1 billion monthly actives, and the org was about 250, 270 people. So huge run. We did, I think, about 49% year-on-year growth my first year, 44% compounded on that, and then 39% the year that I left in 2018. So it was an amazing run. Wasn't actually looking to leave, but then the founders left because of now a lot of what is like, a lot of publicly documented friction with Zuckerberg and others around what was going on with Instagram and the vision. And so I kind of took a step back and asked myself if I wanted to stay or like pursue other opportunities.
Oh, wow. I'm like, I just want to hear you keep talking because it's very smooth and very, it's like reads like a really good book.
Something like that. Maybe one day I'll write a book.
Next. That's great. I mean, it gives us a background of, so you were so you're at Facebook, then you went to Instagram. You like Instas.
I like Instas, yes. This is when I try explaining this to your family who's like over the age of 55. And they're like, you're going where? You're on Instagram to Instacart? Are they,
photo company?
Just like, I don't even talk to them about what I do anymore.
Yeah. You're like photo company to groceries now. And then, and you're like, I help them grow. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about, now that we have some understanding about your background. Well, actually, we don't know about this. Do you do design work, or are you a product manager? Yeah. Okay.
I'm actually VP of product.
Yes.
Focused on growth.
Your background in beyond the VP of product? What is what were you trained in?
I mean, I was trained in a lot of things. I mean, I'm a product manager at heart.
Okay, product manager at heart.
Yeah.
Yes. And how do you think that more designers can think like growth strategists? Do they have to learn product management skills?
They don't.
Is that working okay? Or use mine? Okay. And I'll get
mine is going in and out. So, I have a philosophy of growth that's similar to, I think, just a little bit different. And everything that you all said about growth designers is absolutely true. The way I talk about growth and the philosophy I've tried to imbue here is that growth is really about removing barriers to adoption, and you're focused uniquely on the marginal user. And so what I mean by the marginal user, because it's a relative term, is that if you're always building product for power users, then you're not growing, because the power users are your buddies who already know how to use this thing, right? And so I think, the example of the Netflix different customers across the world is incredibly powerful for this, where people have barriers to adoption of even how they understand the mental model of what that product is. And so even being able to be aware of what these barriers to adoption are, and then figuring out how to solve for them, is what's going to unlock your growth. And so when you think about growth, there's a couple ways of thinking about it, which aren't really clear, I think, in kind of like mass understanding of growth. And this is really important for designers. There's growth that is related to performance marketing, top of funnel, which is different than growth that is related to in-product experience. Right? And for in-product experience, having a collection of all of these people that we talked about, product design, data science, et cetera, are critically important. For designers, understanding that you are building for the marginal user means that there will be conflict with design systems. There will be conflict with kind of how some product designers think about it. But growth and product are not distinct. And so from a design perspective, you should not think about them as being distinct. The way I think about it, and the way I like to talk about it, and the thing that I hope that you all start to think about is when you think about the arc of a company, the arc of a product, there is one end of the spectrum, which is zero awareness, and there's another end of the spectrum, which is the power user, right? And when you think about that marginal user, they're usually at the beginning part of that spectrum.
It's just you.
The first 30 days, I got to hold it, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah.
Hold it to the side or something.
Hello.
It's usually the first 30 days, and it's the early part of that consumer journey where people are becoming aware, they're learning how to use it, they're building habit. And then the consumer teams are where people take over, and you'll start driving share of engagement or share of wallets over time, right? And so these are sister kind of ideas, and growth is really just kind of like a SWAT team or almost expert focused on really deeply understanding what are the barriers to adoption and focusing on the marginal user. And when you focus on the marginal user, I very much employ and push forward kind of the Facebook way of thinking about it, which is understanding, identifying, and executing. And so understanding is deeply working from first principles to understand, well, what is happening? Why do we believe that to be happening? Data could be a tool there. Research or customer development could be a tool there. Like dog fooding the product can be a tool there. And then identifying what is the most important thing that we need to do in order to advance our knowledge or move the product forward. And identifying could mean, hey, we don't have the instrumentation. We need to go and put instrumentation instead of going and building something where we don't actually understand what's happening with the product. It could be, hey, we've done this understand work, but now we need to go out in the field and talk to people because we need to validate or invalidate. Or we need to do an analysis. And then the execute layer is one where we talk about perfect execution. And the reason why we talk about perfect execution is because if you don't execute perfectly, you will never understand if it was the wrong strategy or poor execution. And if it's poor execution, then you at least understand what to do. But if you don't try to perfectly execute, then you're just going to be at the end of this kind of cycle and be like, well, I don't know, maybe that didn't work. Right? So understand, identify, execute is how we think about it. And I think that's really important for design too, because as designers, and what I've tried to work with my designers, especially here and Instagram, it's really about making sure that they embody this philosophy too, so they can push back on the product managers. Say, well, do we really understand what's driving this? Is this hypothesis actually backed by data? Right? Do we believe that this is the right thing to do? And what is the scope here? Making sure, so like everyone on the team is responsible for making sure that we don't have scope creep. We're focusing on the right things. And I think the anti-pattern, last idea here, the anti-pattern to this, which I talk about a lot, is identify, justify, execute. So identify, justify, execute is the thing that most of you all have seen. I have seen it. It is a sad story. It is, you say, you know what would be cool to do? It'd be cool to do this. And you come up with a solution, and then you go pull data that justifies that solution. And then you go work on that thing, and you ship the product, and everyone goes to dinner, high fives all around and tequila shots. You wake up in the morning, you start looking at the dashboards, and nothing moves up. Everything is flat. That is your identify, justify, execute, and that is the pattern you don't want to have. Right? It's because you didn't work from first principles to really understand what was going on with the product. And so this is kind of the philosophy, and I think for everyone who works in growth, you need to own that philosophy. And then for design, it specifically contributes to one, how you think about building and designing what's going to matter for that product. And then how you think about interacting and the questions you have to ask. The philosophy that you want to align around, the metrics and the countermetrics you think about. All of that is rooted in making sure that everyone's thinking about it the right way.
Amazing. I love listening to you talk. It's just amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about Instacart and how you guys set up your growth teams there. Well, let's start with that. But I also want to open the discussion up to the audience for questions that you might have regarding. So we'll start off with the question about how are your teams set up at Instacart for growth, and then I'm going to sneak off to the side, grab mics, and find people who want to ask questions as well.
We definitely should do questions.
Okay.
So yeah. I think at a high level, we've tried to, since I've joined, we tried to reorganize around the growth org around what I would call the parts of the customer journey. So we have like 3 or 4 pillars that we constitute growth around. And the first is acquisition, aptly named. But this is actually very different than what we did at Instagram. I had to really think about this business from the ground up. So acquisition is all things from building awareness or creating awareness to app install or website visit. And the notion here and the principle that we want to have around how we structure the team is that each pillar within growth has a top line metric, and all of the teams that we want to have within that pillar have their own specific metrics that are highly correlated with a top line metric. So for acquisition, the metric is app installs or website traffic. And the teams that we want to build out within acquisition are SEO. Obviously, the metric for SEO would be like traffic from SEO, or paid placements, which is like driving paid marketing, or referrals, right? And then we also have like a retailer branch. So how can we do retailer marketing and leverage our tools and abilities to have retailers drive traffic? So acquisition's one group. There's another group we're calling new people experience. New people experience is not activation, because activation is actually a component. New people experience is all things from once you're at the website or you've downloaded the app, how do we get you to a logged in state, which is very complicated, and how do we get you to have that first purchase experience? And so what I mean by a logged in state is, if you've worked on growth before or anything at scale, what you'll realize is sign up, registration, and account recovery all kind of come from the same place. And if you don't think about it holistically, you'll unintentionally drive one when you're supposed to be driving the other, right? So you can make it super easy to drive a registration, but that person already has an account. And so if you're not looking to see, oh, did someone sign up, did Lex sign up with this phone number already in registration, then you should pop up a thing, say, oh, by the way, is this you? And you're like, yeah, this is me. And then you should log her back into your account instead of creating a duplicate account for her. This matters because if people already have accounts, it's much more likely for you to retain them, because you already have some history, you already have some way of thinking about it. We also think about activation. Activation is really hard in this business. Effectively, if you think about it at a high level, people are entering a virtual marketplace, a store, a Safeway, an Aldi, whatever it is. There are 30,000 SKUs, and you need 8 to 15 products to check out. How do we figure out what are the 8 or 15 things that you need this week in order to check out? Right? So that is like a team, and it is like a monster problem to solve. There's also things like identity. So how do we figure out who is in your household? How do we ask you and understand that information? Because, for example, I am married. I have a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old at home. What's going to be in my basket at Instacart is going to be fundamentally different than my buddy who's like 27 and living a good life as a single guy in the Mission, right? And so understanding and thinking about identity is really important. Like, what if my partner is a pescatarian and my son has a nut allergy, right? We want to make sure that we customize the products that we show to support that, right? But this is critical for activation and for buying that first order. So there's those kinds of product areas. And so again, when we think about this, it needs to drive the same stuff. And then retention is really all around, after you made your first order, how do we help you to make the second order and build a habit? This is also a really hard problem because as adults, as human beings, we've been trained for weekends, every weekend for decades, to go to the grocery store. It's part of our like kind of routine. And so the things that we think about in terms of retention are the notifications. We don't even do a great job today of reminding you that it's been 7 days or 10 days since you've made your last order. So notifications, recurring orders, how do we build products to help you to place recurring orders more frequently? How do we think about the notion of order feedback? Hey, Lex has placed an order. She gave us 3 stars. She is likely to churn. We have data that support that. How do we think about having proactive interventions around that? So retention's a big area. And then another area that we think about is orders and payments, checkout flow, the post-checkout flow, pricing, and all of that infrastructure. So that's kind of how we think about the things that roll into growth. There's a lot that's there.